Greetings, good morning, or good afternoon, young ones. This is Miss Graham,
Miss Spencer.
and we're coming to you today. It's another Science Day, and this is lesson 4 we're working on. So, real quick, I'm gonna have Miss Spencer give us the do's and don'ts.
Typical don't just please do not be disrespectful in any discussions that we do. Watch what you say. Just be respectful at all times. Thank you.
At all times. Okay. All right, this is lesson 4. Welcome back. Let's hop right on in. So,
Okay, so the objectives for this week. Students will be able to review information previously taught about genetics, identify two kinds of factors, and understand the genetic factors can affect development of organisms. So this week is like a refresher course for you guys. So a lot of this information you guys might already know or remember. If you don't remember, it's okay. Just pay attention this time around. Thank you.
yes, yes, yes. Please pay attention this time around. So, let's get ready to do the warm up. So, and in Google Classroom, that's where you'll find your warm up where you can complete it. Your warm up is define what an organism is in your own words. In your own words mean no copy and pasting. Okay? No copy, no pasting. Okay? So, excuse me. So, define what an organism is in your own words. And number 2, what are genetic variations? Give 2 examples. Okay? 2 examples. Now, moving forward. So, we're going to do a little recap from our topic of genetics. This is not just a recap from last week, this is a recap from the previous weeks. So, with that being said, Ms. Spencer, you want to go first?
Okay, so to start off, what are genetics? So genetics is basically your DNA, your features, your characteristics. Those are your genetics.
All right. So genetics is the study of heredity, which is the passing down of your genes from your parents to offspring. Okay? So it's a study of your genes. It's the study of your genes. That's what genetics is, which is what we're currently studying. Okay? Um, what is variation? Variation is how things differ, okay? Meaning it could be different color, different size, different shapes, but how things differ in an individual, okay? Number 3, how are variations expressed?
So variations are expressed by the physical appearances, or by just the differences. So just because your brother has freckles, that doesn't mean you're gonna have freckles. Just because your mom has blonde hair, that doesn't mean you're gonna have blonde hair. So that's how variations are expressed.
Right, like she said, in your physical appearance. Express means show. How does it show? What is asexual reproduction? Asexual reproduction is when an organism makes new organisms, which is offspring, without needing another parent, meaning it only has one parent, okay? So, asexual reproduction is the making of new offspring with only one parent, meaning that the offspring is dun, 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 identical. Okay? So asexual reproduction gives identical offspring because they only have one parent. A meaning singular, always remember one. What is sexual reproduction?
So, sexual reproduction means a female and a male that create an offspring. So, unlike asexual, where only one parent is needed to create an offspring, and sexual reproduction, two parents are needed to create an offspring.
Right. So we have two parts. And in sexual reproduction, we we get uh genes from both parents. We get half of our DNA from our dad, half of our DNA from our mom. So any organism that reproduces sexually gets 23 chromosomes from the male and 23 chromosomes from the female. Okay? There's always a need for an egg and a sperm. They must meet. That is sexual reproduction. Okay? How are the two types of reproduction different? Well, clearly, one is you need one parent, and the other you need two parents, okay? One can reproduce by itself, the other one cannot. It must have both male and female, okay? Sex cells that meet. Also, in sexual reproduction, this is where variation comes from because you get two different sets of DNA, which one comes from dad and one comes from mom. Because you get those two different sets of DNA, this is what causes you to be different, which is why you may not be the same height as your mom or the same height as your dad. Also, asexual, you get identical offspring. So sexual, you get variations of offspring. Sexual, sexual, you get variations of offspring. And asexual, you get identical offspring. Okay? How does genetic variation relate to reproduction? So, I know. Oh, you want to go for it?
You go ahead. I'll take the next one.
Okay, I'm sorry. I do it. So, I know we haven't asked this question. I'm quite sure you're wondering, well, what does one have to do with the other? Which is why Mrs. Graham and Miss Spencer asks, so how does genetic variation relate to reproduction? Well, I'll tell you. Genetic variation arises because of reproduction. Without reproducing sexually, there would be no genetic variation. There would be no difference in offspring. So without the recurring of organisms being reproduced, right? Making more. So if dogs didn't make puppies, there would be no genetic variation. If humans did not reproduce to make children, there will be no genetic variation. Okay? They both go hand in hand. Hand and foot, hand and foot, hand and foot, hand and foot. They both go together. You can't have one without the other. Okay? Now, in asexual, you can have one without the other because you don't need two parents to reproduce, and because there is no variations in asexual reproduction. Why? Because everything's identical. But in sexual, that's where genetic variation comes in. Am I saying that clear, Miss Spencer?
Yes.
Okay. I tend to ramble a little bit. I ain't want to say too much. But yeah, that's how they both relate to each other. Okay? Number 8. Ooh.
What are adaptation, or what is adaptation? So adaptation is basically a change or process of change by which an organism or species becomes better suited to its environment. So adaptation is basically when a species or organism is able to adapt to their environment. For example, like a chameleon, they adapt to their environment by being able to camouflage whenever a predator was to come around.
Very good. Yes. That is absolutely correct. How can you identify adaptations? Well, we talked about two different types of adaptations. Those two different types were behavior adaptations and structure adaptations. Structure meaning how is the organism built? Like, are they built to dig holes? Are they built to fish? Are they built to catch flies in sticky sack? See, if anybody knows, I'm talking about a Venus flytrap, which is a plant. But that's how you can identify the adaptation, the structure. How are they built? And behavior, how do the organism act? Miss Spencer just gave you one. She said the chameleon camouflages with its environment to protect itself from a predator. It also, not just to protect himself, but it also helps the chameleon to hide itself from its prey so he can hunt better. Those are instincts. That's what they do naturally, okay? And number 10. What causes adaptations? Well, adaptations is a result of evolution. And we said that evolution is a change in a species over a long period of time. So, if there was no evolution, there would be no reason for organisms to adapt to their environment. Okay? So, because of evolution, we have adaptations. For example, because of the evolving of the coronavirus, something we had never experienced before, we now have to adapt to living and surviving in the quarantine. Aha. Y'all see how that works both ways? All right. Next. Discussion question. Go ahead, Miss Spencer.
Alright, so what are some things you may think about when you hear the word factor?
Think about it. What are some things I think about when I hear the word factor? What does factor mean to me? Where have I heard factor? These are all the things that should be popping out in your head. Oh, I know why I've heard factor, but what did that mean when I heard it? All these questions should be roaming through your head so that you can come up with an answer. What are some things you may think about when you hear the word factor? All right. Guess what? Let's take a break. You know how this goes. You take your break. We actually urge you to play your Legends of Learning games during your break. Or if you need to go eat, that's fine. You need to take a chill pill. You've been reading too much, or the light getting to you, you're a little sleepy. Whatever your break is, pause your video. Make sure you pause it. Pause. And go ahead and take your break. Okay? But when you come back ready with them notes, okay? Ready with them notes. So, we're going to talk about growth and development briefly. So, we said that development is how something matures and grows, okay? So, how it becomes different over time. Growth. Think about it. What is growth? That's how something gets bigger over time, right? Or how tall something may grow, or how wide something gets. So if it increase in size, then that means that's growth, okay? Or if it increase in an amount, that's growth. But for the sake of right now, we're going to talk about size. When something gets bigger over time, okay? Now, development, like we said, is to become different. How do you develop? Okay? What causes you to change over time? Okay? Now, all organisms have stages of growth. So let's take a human being for an example. The very first stage of human beings is when you are in the womb, when you become what is known as a zygote. That is when the sperm and the egg meet and they fertilize the egg. Now you have a living being growing in the mother's womb. Okay? From there, you become a fetus, which is a tiny little baby. It's really, really small. Okay? You're breathing and you have eyes. And then you grow within your 9 months. You go from looking like a little weird alien type specimen to this big 5, 3, 4, 2 pounds sometimes baby. Yeah. And after you become a baby, you do what? Once you start dun 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 walking and crawling, you're now a baby. And then you move to this phase where you start talking. That's when you become a toddler. You see how we have different growth stages? These are also development stages too. How did you become different? You're now talking. Your color is now coming in. That's how you have changed from a baby to a toddler, okay? Then you have your teenage stage, okay? Now, how do you develop when you're a teenager? Let me tell you. That's where you start catching your attitudes. That's how you become different. Okay? You might decide to get your nose pierced or have your ear pierced. Boys might decide to grow their cornrows or get their waves. These are all things that make you different. This is where you start developing personality, where you start forming how you're going to be and who you are. Okay? But to give you a different example of growth and development, Miss Spencer, didn't we talk about tadpoles? We talked about tadpoles earlier. So,
I believe.
before, but before it becomes a tadpole, you have this really, really small organism and what is called a larva, which is in an egg. Once the egg hatch, what comes from the egg? It is a tadpole, okay? And the tadpole grows and grows and grows until it develops into what we call a frog. That's when it gets its legs. So how did it change from tadpole to frog? Tadpole doesn't have any tails. Doesn't have any legs. It just has a head and a tail. But when you get to the frog stage, frogs have 4 legs and no tails. Okay? So all organisms have different development stages and different growth stages. Moving forward. So genetic factors. So we talked about this word before, factors, but we were talking about environment factors, okay? But this time we want to talk about genetic factors. So, factors are things that's important that determines how something is going to how it's going to be outputted. So how something's going to end up. That's what a factor is. For an example, in math, your factors are what? The numbers before you multiply, right? Mm-hmm. It's something you use to get to an ending. That's what your factor is. And we already discussed that genetics mean what? The study of your genes. So a genetic factor, ding, 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 you need to take your notes. You need to write this down. Your genetic factor are genes that you inherit from your parents, and it determines the different characteristics of the coming offspring, which will be you. Okay? So, your genetic factor, your genes that you get from your parents, determine what you will be like when you're born. Okay? That makes sense? I'm good, Miss Spencer. That makes sense?
Yeah.
All right. So, your genes are what determine what you're going to be physically when you come out. Okay? Now, some examples are your cognitive ability, which means your ability to think, how you think, your personality, your attitudes, and your behaviors. What else could we talk about? Your skin complexion, your freckles, all those things determine, all those things you get from a gene, okay? Now, how can these factors affect your growth in any organism, okay? So, when you have genes that come from your parents, sometimes they can be defective, meaning meaning that they're not good. So if they're not good, then that means your thinking process won't be as good as it should. Meaning you won't be able to think to the capacity of regular normal people, your average person. You might process something slower than someone else, or you may process something, you may look at in a different way than what your average person may see it. Okay. Your attitudes and your behaviors, how can that affect your growth? Well, because that affects you in general. Because you may say, oh, this is not healthy, but I'm going to eat it anyway. If you eat something that's not healthy, you're going to mess up your growth. Your personality can affect your growth. If you're a person that likes sugar, bread, sweets, all those things make you put on what? Fat, right? Or if you don't like the exercise, that's part of your personality because that's something that you have an opinion upon. If you don't like the exercise, it's going to affect your growth because now you're not exercising your body and your muscles aren't getting the proper usage. So now they're going to stiffen and become deformed. Okay. Sometimes people can inherit genes that code for disorders. So someone can inherit a gene or a trait that's called sickle cell. We talked about sickle cell earlier in the school year, right? So if they inherit that gene and it's expressed, right? It's expressed meaning it's turned on, then that means somebody can suffer from that disease, which causes pain, okay? These are just different things and how you can be affected in your growth. Also in your behavior, if you decide to eat things or drink things that are not promoting good health, it can cause your body to slow down. It can affect your metabolism, okay? This is how genetic factors can affect your growth. Anything you want to add, Miss Spencer?
No, I think you said a lot.
I know I did say a lot. So pretty much, not all genes are good. Some of them can lead to diseases. And when you suffer from a disease, that could impact your brain and how you mature, or it can impact your physical body and how you grow. You may not grow to the proper size you're supposed to grow to, or your muscles may not grow properly, meaning that they won't work properly, which would cause you to limp all the time, or your bones may not grow and mature as and develop like they're supposed to. Okay? Um Moving forward. Let's talk nature versus nurture. Miss Spencer, can you read that first one for me?
Mm-hmm. So, nature is the way things occur or happen naturally.
So, I mean, you ain't had to add nothing to it. It wasn't forced. Um, an example of nature would be your genes. You naturally get your genes from your parents. It's not something you make up. It's not something they make up. It's something that they already have, and it's just passed down. Okay? Genes are naturally generated throughout your DNA. Okay? Meaning it's something that you cannot change too. Go ahead, Miss Spencer.
Okay. Nurture is the idea of being taught or having personal experiences.
So, in other words, in order to be nurtured, it has to be something that you're shown or taught or something that you learn over time, okay? Meaning you can change that. That's something you can change when you're nurtured. Not everyone's nurtured the same way, okay? An example of nurture is how you're raised. I was raised not to talk back to my elders. You might not be raised that way, but that's how I was raised. That's something that I was taught. That's something that I was shown. What's another example, Miss Spencer?
For nurture,
Yeah.
Some people, growing up, their parents showed them a lot of love. Their parents would tell them that they loved them. That's being nurtured. Not everybody has that experience.
Absolutely. That is absolutely right. Which could, in turn, create a tough person. All right. So, we put a video in here. And we know, we messed up the last time we put a video in here. Y'all couldn't access it. This time we put a video in here and we're going to let you watch it during the presentation. Okay? So, take notes. If you need to pause it, then pause it. Ask questions if you need to. Or we're an email away. Oh, nope, that wasn't it. I want to play the video. There we go.
Have you noticed that you're different to your relation, parents or carers, your next door neighbour, the kid who lives across the street, and everyone else on the planet? In fact, you're unique. But do you really know why? Why are we all different to each other? Why does any organism have different characteristics to another organism? The answer lies in the long-running debate called nature versus nurture, or genetics versus environment, which is a little less catchy. Nature refers to our genetics, the unique combination of genes that we have naturally inherited from our biological parents from their DNA. Many characteristics are controlled by our genes, including our blood group, eye color, or natural hair color. Some diseases are also caused by our genes. For example, cystic fibrosis. The color of a flower or a fruit is controlled by genes in plants. Nurture refers to the effect of the environment on characteristics. The word literally means care. Examples of characteristics that are determined by the environment are weight or mass, which is dependent on your diet or the presence of a scar. Some diseases may be caused by environmental influences, such as type 2 diabetes or coronary heart disease. Imagine a plant has not received enough sunlight or water. This may influence the height of the plant or the number of fruits produced. We would say that the environment has influenced these characteristics too, or that a plant has been affected by nurture. Can you decide if each of these characteristics is controlled by inherited characteristics, the environment, or both? Where would each go on a Venn diagram? Pause the video while you think. Did you get them all right? The effect of genetics and the environment on characteristics has been researched using identical twins. Can you think why this is? Identical twins have identical DNA, so in theory should have identical characteristics. It follows that any differences between a pair of identical twins could be due to the influence of the environment on their characteristics. In fact, twins often grow up to have very different personalities and preferences beyond their physical similarities. These studies showed that many characteristics are influenced by both genetics and the environment. Some studies actually used twins' identical genomes as a control to prove the effect of the environment on the body. For example, one study showed how skin aged differently by comparing smoker twins with non-smoker twins. Remember that the characteristics of a living organism are influenced by its genetics and its interaction with the environment, so both nature and nurture are responsible.
Please like and share our videos with your friends. If you have any questions that you want help with, just comment below.
So if you had any trouble with the volume in this video, we apologize. But you can go to YouTube and you can type in nature versus nurture, and you should see this picture pop up, and you could watch that. But that's nature versus nurture, okay?
All right, discussion quiz. So if you go into Google Classroom, you guys will see a document labeled discussion quiz. Here you will have a quiz. It's basically, we just want to see what you guys know about nature versus nurture, what you guys might have just learned, basically what you guys took in. It's 2 questions. So the first question is multiple choice. Which of the following sentences are true regarding the nature versus nurture? So you're basically just choosing whichever answers you feel are right. You're not graded on wrong answers or right answers. We just want to see the knowledge that you guys have on nature versus nurture. And question 2 is, based on what you know about nature versus nurture, how does it relate to your life? So give us some examples of how nature and nurture are involved in your life. So for the example we said about nurturing, do your parents say that they love you? For nature, do you look just like your mom or like your dad? You guys have similar personalities. Give us an example of each and basically let us know how it relates to your own personal life. And everybody should have an example because it relates to everybody's life. Nature versus nurture is a part of growing, it's a part of your development, which you guys have just learned too.
Alrighty. Of course, these, as Ms. Spencer said, these questions are multiple choice. Your multiple choices are not here. We just wanted to read you the questions so you understood what it's asking you, but you'll see your multiple choices in Google Classroom, okay? All right. Now, in closing, we wrapping it up. We talked about nature versus nurture. We talked about growth and development. We reviewed adaptations, evolution, and reproduction. We talked about 5 different points today. Okay? If you need to review any of your lessons at any time, we urge you to do that. That's why they are pre-recorded so that you can access them at any time without interruptions. Okay? So once again, we talked about nature versus nurture. That is Mrs. Graham's accident. I misspelled nature, but it's supposed to be nature versus nurture. We discussed growth and development, the difference between the two. We also talked about adaptations. We reviewed evolution and reproduction. All right. So without further ado, man, Miss Spencer signing off. We love you.
Adios.
Sayonara.